Marcus Chen had been awake for 3 days straight when the guards finally came for him. The cell on the alien ship was barely large enough for him to lie down, and the purple light that never dimmed made sleep impossible anyway. His stomach growled constantly from the thin gruel they fed him twice a day, but he refused to let weakness show on his face when the towering figures appeared at his cell door. The aliens called themselves the Zephyri, though Marcus had learned this from overhead conversations rather than direct communication. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with elongated limbs and skin that shifted between deep blue and silver depending on the light. Their faces were angular, almost crystalline, with eyes that glowed like stars, beautiful in a terrifying way. "Human," one of them spoke in heavily accented English. "The Empress commands your presence." Marcus stood slowly, his muscles protesting after days of confinement. "About time," he muttered, though his heart raced. He'd been captured during the failed defense of Luna Colony, one of the few survivors when the Zephyri fleet had overwhelmed Earth's outer defenses. For weeks he'd wondered why they kept him alive while the other prisoners had simply disappeared. The corridors of the ship were vast and gleaming, designed for beings much larger than humans. Marcus felt like a child walking through a cathedral as they led him deeper into the vessel. Zephyri crew members paused their work to stare at him with those burning eyes, some making sounds that might have been laughter. Others simply watched with the cold curiosity one might show an interesting insect. The throne room, when they finally reached it, took Marcus's breath away despite his determination to remain unimpressed. The ceiling stretched so high it disappeared into shadow, and the walls were covered in what looked like living metal that pulsed with soft light. Floating platforms drifted through the air carrying more Zephyri, all watching the proceedings below. But it was the figure on the throne that commanded attention. Empress Zarathul was smaller than the other Zephyri, perhaps only 7 feet tall, but she radiated power like a star radiates heat. Her skin was pure silver, unmarked by the blue tinting of her subjects, and her eyes burned brighter than any Marcus had seen. She wore armor that seemed to be made of the same living metal as the walls, and a crown that defied physics by floating just above her head, rotating slowly and casting rainbow patterns across her face. "So," her voice filled the chamber without effort, speaking perfect English without any accent, "this is the human that killed 37 of my warriors before his capture." Marcus straightened his shoulders. "I was defending my home." A sound like wind chimes filled the air. Zephyri laughter, he realized. The Empress raised one long-fingered hand and silence fell instantly. "Defending," she repeated, tasting the word. "Yes, you humans have such interesting concepts. Tell me, Marcus Chen of Earth, do you know why you still live?" "Because you're planning something worse than a quick death," Marcus replied, meeting her burning gaze. More laughter from the assembled court, but the Empress's expression never changed. "Crude, but not entirely wrong. You live because you fascinate me. In 300 years of conquest, I have encountered 17 different species. All eventually submitted when faced with overwhelming force. All accepted their place in my empire." She stood gracefully from the throne, her armor flowing like liquid as she moved. "But you humans, you do something my scientist cannot explain. When faced with certain death, instead of surrendering, you fight harder. When outnumbered 10 to 1, you devise tactics that should not work. When your leaders are killed, more arise to take their place." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as she descended the steps toward him. "Your species has no special technology. Your bodies are weak compared to ours. Your minds are limited, and yet in every battle we have fought, humans have inflicted casualties that no other species has managed." She stopped just in front of him, close enough that he could see the patterns of light that moved beneath her skin like liquid circuits. "I want to understand this mystery, so I offer you a choice, Marcus Chen." The Empress gestured and one of her guards stepped forward carrying an ornate box. When it opened, Marcus saw a sword inside. Not a human design, but not entirely alien either. The blade seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and the handle was sized for human hands. "This is Void's Edge," the Empress explained, "forged from the heart of a dying star. It has tasted the blood of champions from a dozen worlds." She lifted the sword from the box, testing its weight. "I will face you in single combat. If you win, you will be free to return to Earth with a message of my choosing. If you lose," she smiled, showing teeth like polished obsidian, "you will have the honor of dying by my hand rather than in some mundane execution." Marcus stared at the weapon, his mind racing. This had to be a trap. No way would she risk herself against a human prisoner. Unless she genuinely believed she couldn't lose. The arrogance of a conqueror who had never faced real defeat. "And if I refuse?" he asked. "Then you return to your cell, and tomorrow I select another prisoner for this honor. I have 43 humans in my hold, Marcus Chen. Eventually one will accept." The chamber fell silent except for the low hum of the ship's engines. Marcus could feel hundreds of alien eyes watching him, waiting to see what the strange human would do. Part of him wanted to refuse, to deny her this entertainment. But another part, the part that had kept him fighting when Luna Colony was burning around him, whispered that this might be the only chance he'd ever have. The Empress extended the sword toward him, hilt first. Her silver skin seemed to glow with anticipation. "Choose wisely, human. Your answer will determine whether you die as a warrior or as a coward." Marcus looked at the weapon, then at the alien Empress who had conquered worlds and destroyed colonies. Every instinct screamed that this was suicide. But then he thought of Earth, of the billions depending on people like him to find a way to fight back. He reached out and closed his fingers around the sword's grip. The moment he touched the weapon, he felt something flow through him. Not quite energy, but something deeper. The blade seemed to sing in harmony with his heartbeat. Empress Zarathul's smile widened, revealing more of those obsidian teeth. "Excellent. Tomorrow, after you have rested and fed properly, we will meet in the arena. Do not disappoint me, Marcus Chen of Earth." As the guards led him away, Marcus caught glimpses of Zephyri throughout the ship, watching him with new interest. Word was already spreading. The human had accepted the Empress's challenge. What he didn't know was that in 300 years of conquest, Empress Zarathul had never offered this challenge to any other species, and she had never intended to let any challenger survive to tell about it. But something about the way the human held Void's edge made her burning eyes narrow, with the first doubt she had felt in decades. Marcus woke to the sound of his cell door opening. For the first time since his capture, real food waited for him. Not the thin gruel, but what looked like actual meat and something resembling bread. A guard set down clean clothes that, while obviously alien in design, seemed tailored for human proportions. "The Empress honors challengers with proper preparation," the guard explained in broken English. "You have 2 hours before the arena." As Marcus ate, he tried to process what had happened. The sword, Void's Edge, lay on his small cot, still humming with that strange energy he'd felt when he first touched it. Every time he looked at it, the weapon seemed to draw his attention like a magnet draws iron. He'd fought with swords before, during his military training on Luna Colony. Earth's outer settlements had discovered that traditional blades were sometimes more effective than energy weapons in the close quarters of space station combat. But this alien weapon felt different in ways he couldn't explain. When he picked it up again, the blade seemed to whisper secrets in his mind. Not words exactly, but knowledge. The optimal angle for a strike. The way to shift his weight for maximum power. It was like having a master swordsman coaching him from inside his head. The clean clothes fit perfectly. Black fabric that felt like silk but moved like leather, with subtle armor plates that protected vital areas without restricting movement. Someone had studied human anatomy very carefully. When the guards returned, they led him through different corridors than before. These passages were wider, filled with Zephyri moving with obvious excitement. Word of the challenge had spread throughout the ship, and Marcus could feel their burning eyes following him. Some made the wind chime laughter sound. Others simply stared in silence. The arena was a sphere carved from what looked like a single massive crystal, its walls transparent from the inside but somehow opaque from without. Marcus could see thousands of Zephyri faces pressed against the outer surface, their glowing eyes creating a constellation of light around the fighting space. The floor was smooth metal, inscribed with patterns that might have been decorative or might have served some purpose Marcus couldn't understand. The space was large enough to hold a small spacecraft, giving plenty of room for movement. Impressive, isn't it? Marcus turned to see Empress Zarathul entering from the opposite side of the arena. She had changed from her flowing robes into armor that looked like it was made from crystallized starlight. It covered her completely but moved like a second skin. And her crown had been replaced by a helmet that left only her burning eyes visible. In her hands, she carried a weapon that made Marcus's stomach tighten with worry. It wasn't quite a sword, More like a spear with a blade on each end, but it crackled with energy that made the air around it shimmer. The weapon was easily 8 feet long, giving her a massive reach advantage. 300 years, she continued, moving into a fighting stance that was both alien and somehow familiar. 300 years since I last felt the thrill of genuine uncertainty. Do you know what that's like, human? To be so powerful that victory becomes meaningless? Marcus hefted Void's edge, feeling its weight settle into his hands like it belonged there. I know what it's like to fight for something that matters. Yes, she hissed, and he could hear the smile in her voice. That's exactly what I hoped you would say. Without warning, she struck. The energy spear moved faster than anything that size should have been able to move. Marcus barely got Void's edge up in time to deflect the blow, and the impact sent vibrations up his arms that made his bones ache. She was stronger than any human by far, and her reach gave her a devastating advantage. She flowed into another attack before he could recover, the spear's opposite end coming around in a sweep that would have taken his head off if he hadn't dropped flat to the arena floor. He rolled desperately as the energy blade scorched the metal where he'd been standing. Good, the Empress called, pressing her attack. You don't fight like the others. They all tried to meet strength with strength. Marcus scrambled to his feet, backing away from her next thrust. She was right, he couldn't match her power or reach. But the sword in his hand seemed to be teaching him things his conscious mind didn't know. Instead of trying to block her next attack, he deflected it just enough to slip past her guard. Void's edge kissed her armor, and for the first time in the fight, the Empress stepped backward. She looked down at the thin line scored across her chest plate, then back at Marcus with something that might have been approval. Interesting. Your weapon is sharper than I expected. It's not the weapon, Marcus panted, circling to keep her from cornering him. It's knowing when not to fight directly. This time, when she attacked, he was ready. Instead of meeting her spear head-on, he used his smaller size to stay inside her reach. The energy weapon was devastating at distance, but awkward in close quarters. For a few precious seconds, he managed to stay close enough that her spear became more hindrance than help. But she was learning too. With a move that defied human understanding of physics, she somehow spun the long weapon around her body like a staff, forcing him back and nearly catching him with both ends simultaneously. You're thinking like a human, she observed, pressing her advantage. Linear, predictable, but you're starting to adapt. Marcus wiped blood from a cut on his cheek where her blade had come too close. She was playing with him, he realized. Testing him, but why? The answer came to him as he watched her stance. She was fighting like someone who had never faced a real threat. Her technique was perfect, her strength overwhelming, but there was something missing. She fought like someone who had never experienced desperation. Marcus had lived in desperation for months. It was his natural element now. Instead of backing away from her next attack, he stepped forward into it. The energy spear's point passed so close to his ribs that it burned through his shirt, but he was inside her guard again. This time, instead of trying for a quick cut, he grabbed the spear's shaft with his free hand. For a moment, they were locked together, her impossible strength against his desperate grip. The energy coursing through her weapon made his hand feel like it was on fire, but he held on. Impossible, she breathed, genuine surprise in her voice for the first time. Yeah, Marcus grunted, bringing Void's edge around in a strike aimed at her exposed side. We're good at that. She released the spear and leaped backward with inhuman grace, but not before his blade found its mark. This time the cut went deeper and Marcus saw silver fluid, zephyry blood, stain her armor. The arena fell silent. In the sudden quiet, Marcus could hear his own ragged breathing and the almost musical sound of the Empress's weapon powering down as it clattered across the floor. She stood perfectly still for a long moment, one hand pressed to her wounded side. Then slowly she began to laugh. Not the wind chime sound of her subjects, but something deeper and more genuine. In 300 years, she said, straightening to her full height, only 3 beings have drawn my blood in single combat. 2 of them were champions of their species, warriors trained from birth. She gestured to the weapon on the ground between them. And you abandoned your only advantage to fight me hand to hand. No other species would have been so foolish. Or so desperate, Marcus said, Void's edge still ready in his hands. Yes, she agreed. And suddenly she was holding another weapon, a sword that seemed to be made of crystallized light. Now we fight without advantages. Now I see what makes your species so troublesome. Marcus looked at the glowing blade in her hands, then at the burning eyes behind her helmet. His body ached from the brief exchange, and she'd barely seemed winded. But for the first time since his capture, he felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. The sword in his hands pulsed with responsive energy, and Marcus realized that the real fight was just beginning. The Empress's new sword moved like captured lightning, leaving traces of brilliance in the air as she advanced. Marcus could see immediately that this weapon was different, not just a tool but an extension of her will. Where Void's edge whispered suggestions, her blade sang with perfect harmony. "This is Stellar's heart," she said, settling into a stance that somehow managed to be both graceful and predatory. "Forged from the core of my homeworld's star before I claimed my throne. It has never known defeat." Marcus adjusted his grip on Void's edge, feeling the weapon's dark energy pulse in response to its radiant counterpart. The two blades seemed to recognize each other across the arena. Like old enemies meeting again, neither had you, until today, Marcus pointed out. She struck without warning, her blade carving through the air with impossible speed. But Marcus had been expecting it this time. Instead of trying to match her technique, he did something no properly trained swordsman would ever attempt. He fell backward, letting gravity take him while swinging Void's edge in a wild arc. The move was clumsy, graceless, and completely effective. Stellar's heart passed through empty air where his torso had been, while his own blade scraped along her armor as he dropped. It was a tiny wound, barely more than a scratch, but the Empress stumbled in surprise. "What was that?" she demanded, recovering her balance. "Combat roll," Marcus grunted, spinning on the ground to sweep his leg at her ankles. "Basic human infantry tactics." She leaped over the sweep with inhuman grace, but Marcus was already moving. Instead of getting to his feet properly, he lunged from his prone position, driving Void's edge toward her knee. She deflected the strike, but barely, and he could see confusion in her burning eyes. "You fight without form," she observed, backing away to reassess. "Without structure. It's chaotic." "Adaptive," Marcus corrected, finally standing. He was breathing hard. The constant movement was exhausting, but he could see that his unpredictability was working. Humans don't have the luxury of perfect technique when we're trying to survive. She came at him again, this time with a series of strikes that should have been impossible to survive. Each blow was precise, calculated, beautiful in its deadliness. Marcus responded by doing everything wrong, ducking when he should have parried, attacking when he should have defended, using moves that would have gotten him killed against any human opponent. But the Empress wasn't human, and her perfect technique was designed to counter perfect responses. When she thrust high, expecting him to block or dodge, Marcus dropped to one knee and slashed at her leg. When she swept low, anticipating a jump, he threw himself sideways and rolled. Every response violated the rules of proper swordplay, and every violation bought him another few seconds of life. "Impossible," she breathed after a particularly wild sequence where Marcus had actually thrown Void's edge at her, forcing her to duck, then tackled her while she was off balance. They'd both gone down in a tangle of limbs, rolling across the arena floor before separating. "Your species has no formal combat training?" "We do," Marcus panted, wiping sweat from his eyes. "But we also have something else. We improvise when the rules don't work." "Improvise," she repeated, tasting the word. "Yes, that's what my tactical analysts couldn't predict. Your species changes strategy mid-battle, sometimes mid-swing," Marcus agreed, then proved it by starting what looked like an overhead strike, before spinning into a side slash that caught her off guard. This time, Void's edge bit deeper, finding a gap in her armor near the shoulder. Silver blood flowed more freely, and for the first time the Empress showed signs of actual pain. She stepped back, one hand pressed to the wound. "You're learning my patterns." "Humans are good at that too," Marcus said. "We're pattern recognition machines. Give us enough time and we'll figure out how to kill anything." "Even gods?" she asked, and there was something strange in her voice. Marcus paused, Void's edge ready but not advancing. "Especially gods. We've had practice." The Empress tilted her head, studying him with those burning eyes. "Tell me, Marcus Chen of Earth, what do you know of the Eternal War?" The question caught him completely off guard. "The what?" "Ah," she said softly. "Your species is younger than I thought. The Eternal War began before your star was born, human. A conflict between the forces of order and chaos that has consumed galaxies." She gestured around the arena with her free hand. "The Zephyri serve order. We bring structure to the universe. Peace through conquest. Stability through submission. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. And chaos? Chaos breeds in species like yours. Unpredictable, adaptive, unwilling to accept their proper place. Her voice carried what might have been sadness. I have spent 3 centuries bringing order to this galaxy, human. Your species is the first that truly resists. Maybe that should tell you something, Marcus said. It does, she agreed, raising Stellar's heart again. It tells me that humanity must be completely destroyed, or the eternal war comes to this galaxy. There can be no middle ground. The weight of her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. This wasn't just about conquest or even survival. This was about something larger than he could comprehend. Unless, the Empress continued, I can prove that your chaos can be directed, controlled, made to serve order's purpose. Understanding dawned on Marcus like a cold sunrise. This isn't a fight for my freedom. No, she confirmed. This is an experiment. Can a human's chaotic nature be channeled into service? Can your species be domesticated? Marcus felt something break inside his chest. Not physically, but something deeper. The hope he'd been building crumbled, replaced by a fury so pure it felt like ice in his veins. You want to turn us into weapons, he said quietly. Your species is already weapons. Marcus Chen. The question is whether you'll serve order or be destroyed by it. Void's edge pulsed in his hands, and suddenly Marcus could feel something else flowing through the weapon. Not just the whispered suggestions of technique, but something darker, hungrier. The blade wanted to feed, wanted to taste divine blood. You made one mistake, Marcus said, settling into a stance that felt more natural than anything he'd done before. What mistake? The Empress asked, genuinely curious. Marcus smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. You gave a human a weapon that hates you as much as we do. This time, when he attacked, it wasn't with human desperation or human unpredictability. This time, he attacked with something that had been waiting in Void's edge for centuries. The concentrated hatred of every species the Zephyri had conquered and destroyed. The blade screamed through the air, no longer black but burning with dark fire. And for the first time since the fight began, Empress Zarathul looked genuinely afraid. The real battle was finally starting. The dark fire surrounding Void's edge cast shadows that moved independently of the blade. And Marcus could hear something like voices whispering in languages he'd never learned but somehow understood. The weapon wasn't just accepting his anger, it was amplifying it, feeding it with the fury of civilizations that no longer existed. Empress Zarathul raised Stellar's heart to block, but the collision of their blades sent shockwaves through the arena that cracked the crystal walls. The watching Zephyri outside stumbled backward, their glowing eyes wide with something Marcus had never seen in them before. Fear. What have you done? The Empress demanded, but her voice carried uncertainty now. I stopped pretending this was about honor, Marcus snarled, pressing his attack. Void's edge moved like it weighed nothing, cutting through the air with hungry precision. Your weapon knows what you really are. Each strike drove her back, dark flames licking at her crystalline armor. The perfect technique she'd displayed before began to crumble as she struggled to adapt to his newfound ferocity. But Marcus could see something else in her movements, not just surprise but recognition. Impossible, she breathed, barely deflecting a strike that would have taken her head. That weapon was cleansed. The war spirits were bound centuries ago. Guess they don't like being chained, Marcus replied, bringing Void's edge around in a strike that shattered part of her shoulder guard. The Empress leaped backward, putting distance between them, and for the first time her perfect composure cracked. You don't understand what you're unleashing, human. Those spirits fought in the eternal war for millennia. They know only destruction. Then they picked the right species to work with. Marcus advanced, but something in her posture made him pause. She wasn't afraid anymore, she was calculating. The burning eyes behind her helmet had taken on a different quality, like a computer processing vast amounts of data. Yes, she said slowly. Yes, this is exactly what the hierarchs predicted. The what now? The Empress straightened, and suddenly she seemed larger somehow, as if invisible weight had settled on her shoulders. The hierarchs of order, human. The beings who guide the eternal war from beyond physical reality. They told me your species would be different. She gestured with Stellar's heart, and the arena around them began to change. The crystal walls turned transparent, revealing not the interior of the ship but space itself. Marcus could see star systems arrayed around them like glowing jewels, and each one pulsed with different colored light. "Every star you see represents a world we have brought to order," the Empress explained. "Green for compliant populations, blue for species that required adjustment, red for worlds that chose destruction over submission." Marcus counted the lights and felt his heart sink. There were thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands, and almost all glowed green or blue. The scattered red stars looked lonely by comparison. "Your Earth burns yellow," she continued, pointing to a star that pulsed with unstable light. "Undecided. Neither order nor chaos hold sway. That's why the hierarch sent me personally. To tip the scales," Marcus said, understanding creeping over him. "To determine if humanity can serve order's purpose, or if it must be cleansed like the others." She raised Stellar's heart again, but this time the blade blazed with light so pure it hurt to look at. "The weapon you carry has shown me the answer." The dark fire around Void's edge roared higher in response, and Marcus could feel the spirits within it stirring to full wakefulness. They whispered secrets in his mind. The true nature of the eternal war. The billions of species caught between order and chaos. The slow death of creativity and growth as order consumed galaxy after galaxy. "Your hierarchs made a mistake," Marcus said, settling into a fighting stance that felt ancient despite his human limitations. "They think this is about serving order or chaos. But humans don't serve anyone." "Then your species will burn," the Empress replied, but there was something almost regretful in her voice. "Maybe. But we'll take you with us." They clashed again, but this time the battle was different. Stellar's heart blazed with the accumulated power of order. Perfect technique, flawless strategy, overwhelming force. But Void's edge countered with something that order could never understand or predict: pure human stubbornness. Where her strikes were precise, his were wild. Where her tactics were calculated, his were desperate, and somehow, impossibly, desperation was winning. "You cannot defeat order with chaos," she panted, silver blood flowing from a dozen wounds. "Watch me," Marcus grunted back, though he was in little better shape. But as they fought, he became aware of something else happening. The spirits in Void's edge weren't just feeding on his anger, they were learning from it. And more disturbing, he could feel his own mind opening to theirs. Memories that weren't his own began to surface. Civilizations destroyed, species enslaved, entire galaxies converted into perfect, sterile monuments to order. Among those memories, he saw something that made his blood freeze. Earth's future. In the visions the spirits shared, he saw human cities reduced to geometric perfection, saw children born into predetermined roles, their creativity systematically eliminated, saw the species that had produced Shakespeare and Einstein and countless unnamed rebels reduced to efficient, obedient drones. "You see it now," the Empress said, noticing his hesitation. "Order is not evil, human. It is peace. It is stability. It is an end to suffering." "It's death," Marcus whispered, understanding flooding through him. "Death of everything that makes life worth living." "Yes," she agreed sadly. "But it is also safety. No more wars. No more conflict. No more pain." Marcus looked at Void's edge, at the dark flames dancing along its edge, and suddenly understood the terrible choice before him. The weapon could give him the power to defeat her, but only by embracing the very chaos that order existed to destroy. He would win by becoming exactly the kind of monster she claimed humans were. But if he didn't embrace that power, Earth would fall. Humanity would be processed into another green star on her map. "The hierarchs knew you would face this moment," the Empress said gently. "They knew that any species capable of true resistance would eventually be offered the same choice: submit to order or become servants of chaos." "What if I choose neither?" Marcus asked. For the first time since their battle began, Empress Zarathul smiled with what looked like genuine warmth. "Then, Marcus Chen of Earth, you would be the first species to find a third path, and that," she raised Stellar's heart one final time, "would change everything." The blade of pure light descended toward him, and Marcus had perhaps 1 second to decide the fate of his entire species. In that second, with Void's edge burning dark fire in his hands and the accumulated wisdom of destroyed civilizations whispering in his mind, Marcus Chen made a choice that would echo across galaxies. He dropped his weapon. Stellar's heart stopped inches from Marcus's throat, its blazing light reflecting in his determined eyes. The Empress stared at him in complete bewilderment. Her perfect composure finally shattered. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Something you wouldn't expect," Marcus said calmly, even though his heart was racing. Around them, Void's edge lay on the arena floor, its dark flame slowly dimming as the war spirits within it cried out in frustration and rage. "You surrender?" The Empress took a step back, lowering her weapon slightly. "After everything? After touching the power that could have made you a god among your species?" "No," Marcus said, spreading his arms wide. "I'm refusing to play your game." The crystal arena fell silent except for the low hum of the ship's engines. Outside the transparent walls, thousands of Zephyri faces pressed closer, their glowing eyes wide with confusion. This wasn't in any tactical manual they'd studied. "Explain," the Empress commanded, though her voice carried curiosity rather than anger. Marcus sat down cross-legged on the arena floor, completely vulnerable, but somehow radiating calm. "Your hierarchs think there are only two choices, order or chaos. Submit or rebel, but humans have been dealing with false choices for thousands of years." "False choices?" she repeated. "Yeah. Like when someone tells you that you have to choose between freedom and safety, or between progress and tradition. Humans tend to look at those kinds of ultimatums and ask, why can't we have both?" The Empress circled him slowly, Stellar's heart still ready to strike, but Marcus could see uncertainty in her movements. "The eternal war has raged for eons, human. Every species eventually chooses a side." "That's the problem right there," Marcus said, meeting her burning gaze. "You've been fighting so long you've forgotten what you're fighting for. Order thinks chaos is evil. Chaos thinks order is death. But what if you're both wrong?" "Impossible. Order brings peace. Order brings stagnation," Marcus interrupted. "And chaos brings growth, but also destruction. You need both." He gestured around the arena, at the countless stars visible through the crystal walls. "Look at those worlds you've brought to order. How many of them have created anything new in the last century? How many have produced art or music or scientific breakthroughs?" The Empress was quiet for a long moment. "Such things are inefficient. They're life," Marcus said simply. "Real life requires both structure and freedom. Order without chaos becomes death. Chaos without order becomes meaningless destruction. But together they create what?" she asked, and for the first time, she sounded genuinely curious rather than commanding. Marcus smiled. "They create humanity. We build cities with perfect order, then let graffiti artists mess with the walls. We create rigid scientific methods, then let wild imaginations explore what's possible. We make rules, then break them when they stop serving us." "Heresy," she breathed, but there was wonder in her voice. "Innovation," Marcus corrected. "Evolution, life refusing to be put in a box." Stellar's heart slowly lowered as the Empress stared at him. The hierarchs would call this impossible. Order and chaos cannot coexist. Then the hierarchs have never met humans. Marcus stood slowly, keeping his hands visible and away from the abandoned void's edge. "I'm not going to fight you anymore, Empress. Not because I surrender, and not because I accept your rule. I'm refusing to fight because the fight itself is the problem. You would abandon your species to order. I would show your hierarchs that there's a third option. That maybe, after eons of war, it's time to try something different." The arena shimmered around them, and suddenly Marcus realized they weren't alone. Figures were materializing in the space around them, beings of such perfect geometric beauty that looking at them hurt. The hierarchs of order, arriving to witness what their servant had discovered. At the same time, shadows began to coalesce. In the corners, formless shapes that whispered with the voices of destroyed worlds, the powers of chaos, drawn by the possibility that their eternal enemies might finally be vulnerable. "The experiment concludes," one of the hierarchs spoke, its voice like crystal bells. The human species shows promise for conversion to order. No, hissed one of the shadow figures. They have touched chaos. They belong to us now. Marcus found himself standing between the two forces, feeling the weight of their attention like physical pressure. But instead of fear, he felt something else. Pity. You're both missing the point, he said, his voice somehow carrying clearly through the arena. You've been fighting over who gets to control life, but life isn't meant to be controlled. It's meant to be lived. Silence, the hierarch commanded. You are a lesser being. You cannot comprehend. I comprehend that you're scared, Marcus interrupted, and the arena fell dead silent. Both of you. You're terrified of what happens if you stop fighting, because then you'd have to admit that maybe the war was pointless. The hierarch blazed brighter with indignation, while the shadows writhed with fury. But Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. Empress, he said, turning to Zarathul, you've conquered 1,000 worlds. How many of them thanked you? Her silver skin flickered with uncertainty. Gratitude is irrelevant. Order brings stability. And you, Marcus addressed the shadows, you've corrupted how many species? How many of them found happiness in your chaos? The darkness roiled but gave no answer. That's what I thought, Marcus said. You've both been so busy winning that you forgot what victory was supposed to look like. He walked to where Void's edge lay on the arena floor, but instead of picking it up, he knelt beside it. This weapon contains the spirits of destroyed civilizations. They've been screaming for revenge for centuries, but what if revenge isn't what they actually want? Marcus placed his hand on the blade, and immediately the dark flames roared back to life. But this time, instead of anger and hatred, he felt something else flowing through the connection, a desperate, aching longing for home, for the worlds that had been destroyed, for the children who would never be born. They don't want revenge, Marcus said, understanding flooding through him. They want to live again. The weapon trembled under his touch, and the shadows around the arena began to shift, taking on more solid forms. For just a moment Marcus could see them as they had been, representatives of the countless species caught between order and chaos, neither choosing a side. Impossible, the hierarch declared, but its voice carried the first note of uncertainty. No, said Empress Zarathul, staring at the transforming shadows with something like wonder. Not impossible, just unprecedented. Marcus stood, Void's edge now blazing with light that was neither the pure radiance of order nor the consuming darkness of chaos, but something entirely new, the warm, imperfect glow of living worlds. Here's my proposal, Marcus said, addressing both the geometric perfection of the hierarchs and the writhing chaos of the shadows. Stop fighting. Start building. Order and chaos working together to create something neither could accomplish alone. And if we refuse? The shadow voice hissed. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since his capture, it was entirely without fear. Then humanity will show you how it's done, and you can watch from the sidelines while a lesser species fixes what you couldn't. The challenge hung in the air like a blade poised to strike, and Marcus could feel the attention of powers beyond imagination focused entirely on him. It was time to see if humans really were as stubborn as their reputation suggested. The silence stretched for what felt like eternity. Around the arena, hierarchs of pure geometric light faced shadows of writhing chaos, and between them stood a human holding a weapon that blazed with neither force, but with something entirely new. Finally, one of the hierarchs spoke, its voice like the music of crystalline spheres. You propose to end the eternal war. I propose to evolve past it, Marcus corrected. Wars end when someone wins or everyone dies. I'm suggesting you grow beyond the need for war. The shadows hissed with what might have been laughter. Naive creature. Order and chaos cannot coexist. They are fundamental opposites, says who? Marcus challenged. You? Your predecessors? How do you know if you've never actually tried? Empress Zarathul stepped forward, her crystalline armor reflecting both the light of the hierarchs and the darkness of the shadows. The human has a point. In 3 centuries of conquest, I have never seen a species attempt synthesis. Because synthesis is impossible, the hierarch declared. But Marcus could hear doubt creeping into its perfect voice. "Okay," Marcus said, setting Void's Edge down again. "Let me show you something." He closed his eyes and reached out with his mind, not to the weapon or to the powers surrounding him, but to something simpler. To the memory of home. Suddenly, the arena filled with images, not the perfect geometric projections the Zephyri used, but the messy, chaotic, beautiful reality of human civilization. Cities where ancient architecture stood next to ultra-modern skyscrapers. Laboratories where rigid scientific method was used to explore wild, imaginative theories. Families where rules provided security but love allowed for individual growth. "This is order and chaos working together," Marcus said, opening his eyes. "We've been doing it for millennia without even thinking about it." The hierarchs moved closer, their perfect forms studying the images with what looked like fascination. "Inefficient," one observed, but without the usual disgust. "Chaotic, but functional," another added almost reluctantly. "They achieve stability through controlled instability." "Impressive," the shadows whispered, coiling around the images. "They grow through structured growth. They create by breaking and rebuilding." Marcus felt a surge of hope. They were actually listening. "Every human child learns this," he explained. "You need rules to feel safe, but you need freedom to become yourself. You need structure to build on, but you need chaos to innovate. It's not about choosing one or the other, it's about finding the balance." Balance, Empress Zarathul repeated the word like she was tasting something foreign. "The concept appears in our oldest texts, but it was deemed obsolete." "Obsolete because it's difficult," Marcus said. "It's easier to pick a side and fight. Balance requires constant adjustment, constant communication, constant work. But look at the results." The images around them shifted to show the best of humanity. Scientific breakthroughs achieved through creative thinking within methodical frameworks. Art that combined technical skill with emotional expression. Societies that provided both security and freedom. "This is what you could have," Marcus said, addressing both forces equally. Not the sterile perfection of pure order, not the destructive freedom of pure chaos, but something alive, something that grows. One of the hierarchs rotated slowly, its geometric perfection somehow conveying deep thought. "The proposal has merit, but implementation would require unprecedented cooperation." "We could start small," Marcus suggested. "One world, one experiment. Let order and chaos work together to nurture instead of conquer or corrupt." "And if the experiment fails?" a shadow voice asked. Marcus smiled. "Then humans will fix whatever went wrong and try again. That's what we do." For a moment, the arena buzzed with communication between the two forces. Crystalline chimes from the hierarchs, whispered languages from the shadows. Marcus couldn't understand the words, but he could feel the tension of a decision being made. Finally, Empress Zarathul spoke. There would be conditions. Humanity would serve as mediators, demonstrating how order and chaos can coexist. "Not serve," Marcus corrected firmly. "Partner. Equals working together, not servants taking orders." "Impossible," the hierarch began, but stopped when Marcus started laughing. "You're doing it again. Impossible is humanity's favorite word to ignore." Another long pause, then. "Very well. One world. One experiment. Under human guidance." The shadows writhed with what might have been agreement. "We concur. But if this balance proves false, if order attempts to subsume chaos, then the war continues," Marcus acknowledged. "But if it works, if we can show that there's a better way, then the eternal war ends," Empress Zarathul said solemnly. "And the galaxy begins a new age." Marcus picked up Void's Edge one final time, feeling the weapon respond to his touch. But now, instead of whispers of revenge, he heard something else. The voices of the destroyed civilizations, but speaking of hope instead of hatred. They wanted to build, not destroy. They wanted to create, not corrupt. "There's one more thing," Marcus said, turning to address the assembled powers. "The worlds you've already conquered, the ones marked green and blue on your map, they deserve a choice too. You would undo centuries of work?" The hierarch asked. "I would offer them the chance to live instead of just exist. Order without growth isn't peace, it's death in slow motion." Empress Zarathul considered this, her burning eyes reflecting the new light from Void's Edge. It would mean releasing control of over 30,000 worlds. It would mean giving them the chance to become something better than either of us could make them, alone. The shadows coiled with what might have been amusement. The human is ambitious. The human is right, the Empress said finally. Power that requires constant enforcement isn't really power at all. The hierarchs hummed among themselves, then one of them stepped forward. Very well. The experiment will encompass not just one world, but any world that chooses to participate. Order and chaos will work in cooperation, guided by human principles of balance. And if they refuse guidance? Marcus asked because he had to know. Then they remain free to choose, a shadow voice replied. True choice. Not order's submission or chaos's corruption, but actual freedom to find their own path. Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since his capture. Not just hope, but joy. Real overwhelming joy at the thought of billions of worlds suddenly free to discover what they might become. There's just one problem, he said, grinning at the assembled cosmic powers. I don't speak for humanity. I'm just one soldier who got captured. Empress Zarathul's laughter filled the arena. Not the wind chime sound of her species, but something warmer, more human. Then I suppose we'll have to return you to Earth so you can ask them. All of them? Marcus asked, still hardly believing what was happening. All of them, she confirmed. Because if this is to work, it cannot be imposed from above. It must be chosen freely, by every world, every species, every individual. The arena began to shift around them, the cosmic powers of order and chaos starting to fade as they prepared to enact the most fundamental change the galaxy had ever seen. One more thing, Marcus called out as they departed. When you meet other humans, remember, we don't like being told what's impossible. We tend to take it as a challenge. The last thing he heard before the powers departed was what sounded remarkably like cosmic laughter, from both order and chaos alike. 3 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the UES Defiance, watching as representatives from across the galaxy gathered at Luna Station for the first Galactic Balance Conference. Ships from thousands of worlds filled the space around Earth, their crews eager to learn about the strange species that had somehow talked the forces of order and chaos into working together. Empress Zarathul stood beside him, no longer in armor but in robes that seemed to shift between crystalline structure and flowing chaos. Second thoughts? She asked. Marcus watched a group of human children giving a presentation on playground democracy to a delegation of previously conquered worlds, their enthusiastic chaos somehow creating perfect order as every species found a way to participate. Yeah, he said, smiling as one of the kids accidentally started an impromptu dance party that somehow turned into a formal negotiation session. I'm thinking we should have done this sooner. Outside the station, the stars pulsed not with the colors of conquest, but with the warm light of worlds choosing their own paths. The eternal war was over. Life was just beginning.